Two young artists who were recently married went on a planned camping trip to the redwoods in their van with their only child, a 2-year-old Cocker Spaniel. Since the trip was planned out and people knew they would be gone, no one knew that they were missing until Rosina didn't show up for work. 3 days later, a fellow camper noticed the Andersons' dog tied up outside of their van, seeming very distressed. As she walked closer, she noticed a broken window and was hit with the unmistakable odor coming from inside the van. This case would remain unsolved for almost 3 decades until a serial rapist and killer confessed to save his own life. For today's story, we are heading back to the forest, the same as last time. Slightly different area, but the same state park and general vicinity. You're going to notice a trend at first. All the stories, at least at first, are going to be less than well-known and untold stories from my hometown. I'm sure they're just not very well known because it's a small town and there's also not a lot of information about some of these that I'm sharing with you. Oddly enough, for a small town, there are a lot of murders. They average 1 to 2 per year, which might not seem like a lot, but it's 8,000 people. It's not Los Angeles for sure. So 1 to 2 a year is a lot for a small little town like that. I can see why, though, because the forest, let's face it, offers the perfect dumping grounds. So seclusion, darkness, along with wild animals to blame it on, and a lot of rain to wash the evidence away. So now I know I'm supposed to ask for likes, so I do like likes if you like the story, but I always have really had an issue with the like button being the thumbs up, because when I use the thumbs up on social media, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. I really have nothing else to say to somebody. I don't usually like people's stuff. If it's something I actually like, I usually put a heart on it. I know there's not always a place that you can put a heart for something that you like in different areas. So if you like it, give me the big F you with your thumb. Heart if you can, because I'd prefer that because it's just my thing. Share if you know other people who want to hear this content. Subscribe so you never miss an installment. And turn on notifications so you never miss when a new episode becomes available. Please go ahead and take a moment to read the disclaimer before continuing on. These stories do contain triggering content for some and are intended for mature audiences only. So without any more delay, we're heading back to California in the United States. Way up north in California, the real Northern California, not Sacramento, near the Oregon border, is the small town of Crescent City. It's known to be where the forest meets the sea, and outside of town on Highway 199 is Jedediah Smith State Park. Inside of Jedediah Smith State Park is Stoutgrove. It's a grove of redwood trees that are 300 feet tall. They're the old growth, so they're giant, beautiful backdrop for photos, and it's said to be a haunted area. With the amount of dead bodies that have been found up there, I can definitely see why people would think that or say that. This story has absolutely nothing to do with hauntings, but it does have to do with dead bodies, and it may haunt you. Two young artists from a town near Portland, Oregon, were recently married, happy and in love. The two lovebirds had gone on a planned camping trip to the redwood forest in their van, but Doug and Rosina Anderson's outdoor bliss would be cut tragically short. In August of 1988, Doug was 26 years old and happily married to Rosina, who was 31 at the time and equally as happy. The two had no children, but they did have a 2-year-old Cocker Spaniel who was responsible for drawing attention to the horrific crime scene. The Andersons' dog was tied up outside of their van, and a fellow camper had noticed and went to check on the dog. As the woman got closer to the van, she noticed a broken window and then was hit with the stench of death. It was known that the couple was going to take a trip to the forest to camp out and get away. They had also stopped on August 14th to see Rosina's aunt in Medford, Oregon, which is about 2 hours away from their camping destination. No one even knew that they were missing until Rosina failed to show up for work on August 19th, and 3 days later, a fellow camper would notice their dog tied up outside of their van and the unmistakable odor coming from inside. The Delnorte County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to investigate, and when they opened the van, Rosina was sexually assaulted and shot. Doug had been shot multiple times, resulting in his death as well. The weapon that was used was a .22 caliber gun, which is a smaller caliber weapon that is used for basic firearm training usually, small game hunting. They don't have a large recoil and they're quiet. So all of these factors played a role in the reason there were 9 shell casings found in the van. .22s are not weapons that will cause tremendous blood loss or would even take down an attacker. There have been people that have been shot in the head with .22s and lived through it. So 9 rounds seems like a lot of overkill, and if it was a larger caliber gun that was used, it definitely would be. But being this was a .22, it was probably just enough to assure the couple's death. And being that this all took place in 1988, paired with the amount of time before the bodies were found, the decomposition of the bodies, and unclear motive, this case very quickly went cold, and it would stay that way for 27 years. In 1986, so 2 years prior to the slaying of Doug and the rape and murder of Rosina, about 7 hours down south, right outside of San Francisco, California, there was a very young and beautiful girl whose life was cut tragically short. Annette Thur was out partying with her friends. She decided it was time to go home. She started walking in the direction of her house, and being a little tipsy and tired, she decided to give an oncoming vehicle the thumbs up, indicating that she wanted a ride. The driver of this vehicle, seeing that she was a young girl, immediately pulled over and let her in. On December 6th of 1986, Annette's body was found down a ravine in San Mateo County in California. She had been raped, sodomized, and dumped over an embankment. With no clues or DNA database, her case would go cold for over 2 decades. In 1995, John William Kelly, who was no stranger to law enforcement, was arrested and pled guilty to sexually assaulting an unnamed acquaintance at his home. This rape would not only give John a 6-year prison sentence, but his DNA was collected and stored as evidence. 3 years later, when the FBI's DNA database known as CODIS was up and running, DNA samples from rape cases all over were loaded into it, and John Kelly's samples from his 1995 rape case were loaded in as well. He was still incarcerated at the time, and after the entry of Kelly's DNA into CODIS, the cold case of raped and murdered teen Annette Thur would finally gain some traction towards being solved, but this didn't happen for another 17 years. Cold cases are unfortunately out of sight and out of mind, so they're not looked into very often. It's more like somebody plays a game of case roulette, and the name chosen will be reviewed at that time, and if there are any new resources that may shed light on the case, they'll be utilized and hopefully generate new information that points to the killer and provides some overdue justice for the victims and closure for their family. In 2012, one such case roulette would bring about Annette Thur's case to be reviewed. Since Annette had been raped, she did have a rape kit taken, but being that it was only 1986, it just sat in evidence until this day in 2012, where it was added into the CODIS database. After a period of time, the forensic specialist saw 2 little words on the screen that would finally give Annette the justice she deserved and put her case to rest. Positive match. The DNA match to Annette Thur's rape and murder case was the convicted rapist John Kelly of Placerville, California. Annette's mother had waited 26 years for the answers as to who was responsible for her young daughter's demise. After this break in the case, investigators looked into Kelly's past and found not only was he convicted in 1995 for the rape of his acquaintance, he had been convicted of statutory rape and sexual battery only 3 months before he found Annette hitchhiking in 1986. So there's a definite pattern, and it seems like this is just who John Kelly is, and it's not much of a surprise or a stretch to think that he was capable of murder. But when the death penalty was put on the table for Annette's rape and murder, in order to save his own life, he would deliver a shocking confession to 2 more cold cases. John Kelly was later transferred to Delnorte County, California, where he confessed to the cold case murder of 26-year-old Doug Anderson and the cold case rape and murder of Doug's wife, 31-year-old Rosina Anderson. 2 cold cases finally got closure after almost 30 years of going unsolved, and without his confession, they likely would have never been solved and the families would have never gotten closure. For this, John Kelly would save his own life. His death sentence was taken down to life in prison, where he will remain out the rest of his natural life without the possibility of parole. Since he's been incarcerated for these crimes, he has not confessed to any additional crimes, nor did he give any reasoning for them. My theory is he's just a sick person and his victims were not stalked or picked out, but more so chosen out of convenience when one of his urges flared up. Now, none of these developments bring back these families' loved ones, but it does provide some closure for them and justice for those that were taken too soon. Annette's mother describes this feeling as being like dark Christmas. These people are supposed to be happy that the killer was caught, but at the end of the day, the person that they loved is still gone forever. And the small victory here is that multiple cold cases were solved with just 1 DNA sample, and an evil man who likely would have never stopped can never hurt anyone again. So now for the common theme, being that they're cases from my hometown and it's a super small town, most of them are personal in some way, some more so than others. But in the case of the Stoutgrove murders of Doug and Rosina Anderson, a man who is just barely a man for so many reasons, but I'm pointing towards his age with this statement. He was such a terrible person at such a young age. He was questioned and initially thought to be responsible for their deaths and Rosina's rape. He was known to carry a huge knife everywhere he went. He had access to guns, abused animals, and women. He was just a walking, talking red flag for murder. He fit the criteria of someone who would almost certainly eventually graduate to murder, so they brought him in for questioning. He was not charged, as they didn't have enough evidence, and to much surprise, he actually wasn't responsible. This person was my mom's second husband, and he was a completely terrible human being, and if he had been convicted of murder, it would not have been a shock at all. That is the less than well-known case of John Kelly, the serial rapist and murderer who murdered Doug Anderson and raped and murdered his wife Rosina in Stoutgrove, California. Also, the rape and murder of young teenage girl Annette Thur, who ultimately solved the rape and murder of the Anderson couple in Stoutgrove. As if John Kelly's life was not put on the line for her assault and murder, the Andersons' case likely would have never been solved. So that's going to do it for today. I hope you enjoyed hearing the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. If you like the story, go ahead and share. Leave me a comment. Let me know if I'm crazy for feeling that way about the like button. And subscribe so you never miss any future installments.